From the heart of Central Florida, you're listening to the most electrifying show in media. A Neighbor's Choice. And I'm your host, your neighbor, David Gronowski. So glad to be with you live again for another journey through the news. Here we go again. Another day, another bunch of noise and confusion and all this ruckus that we've got to put up with. We just want to live our lives in peace. Just want to have a great time. Enjoying the simple pleasures of life. And yet, we still have more and more little controversies and scandals flooding around us. And so that's what we have to deal with as neighbors. We have to deal with the fact that the media machine continues, no matter what we do, try as we might, to ignore it. We just want to be left alone, but yet they are actively proselytizing us and our neighbors to join them in their deep and ever-loving, abiding faith in the state and its experts, its failed experts. And they fail at everything that they say that they have a natural monopoly to tell us, what's what in. They've told us, we as Mark Milley said the other day, we had no idea. We had no information whatsoever that the Afghanistan army, that they had spent $2 trillion and so forth, thousands of lives, getting ready for their big debut, would fold in so fast and so quick. They had no information. They hadn't studied the region. They hadn't looked at anthropology. They hadn't looked at anything, history, nothing, apparently. Guys were too busy reading Foucault and talking about social constructs. That's all they had time for, I guess. But yet you didn't know that. You saw their badges and you said, hey, if they're saying there's no reason the Afghanistan army is going to fold, they're the experts. I mean, they've got all those uniforms and all that way of speaking, and they've got all that media attention. They must be experts. And so many people were shocked at their incompetence laid bare. But we shouldn't be surprised by now. We had experts like Alan Greenspan, as far back going there, telling us for years and years and years. He was an expert on economies. And he was telling us, the TV told us, buy a house, buy a house, buy a house, get in debt. There's no reason to ever back down. Just keep going. Everything's looking perfect. And people said, hey, he looks and sounds like an expert about money and economies. So let's listen to him, honey. Let's get in debt. With a mortgage we can't afford. And that's why people lost their entire livelihood. They lost their savings. They lost so much, their homes, in that housing crisis. So we keep looking at a train of failed experts trying to make sense of all of these different things. The same experts like Fauci who were funding a dentist-level secure lab, a biosafety lab with a dentist-level security standard. That's number 2, biosafety level 2. That's the equivalent of your dentist office when you get your teeth cleaned and checked. That's the kind of level of security. Do you see hazmat suits on when you get your teeth looked at? That's the level of security they had, that the genius Tony Fauci thought and his buddies thought that they could fund this lab doing the research with humanized mice to see if they could get the spike protein to go into the ACE2 receptors in human cells. And that's the kind of expert that told you, we'd be done with this by last spring, remember? If you just do what we tell you. That's the same expert who glowingly looks at Australia with fondness as they have 9 p.m. curfew nationwide. They get arrested if they don't go out. They can't take off their mask even when they're by themselves exercising. They have to have a QR code to get into stores. And he looks at that fawningly. And somehow, some way, that guy who has nothing to do politically, culturally, ethically with what America is supposed to be as a republic, somehow this guy is the hottest ticket in town after he stupidly unleashes this research into this Wuhan lab doing gain of function. And then number two, tells us lie after lie and looks fawningly and glowingly at places like Australia and says, man, I wish we could do that here. I'd love to do that here. And yet this guy is brought around as your savior. So we live in an era where we have failed experts that the state has given us over and over and over again. At what point is there going to be a paradigm shift in the public's tolerance for such deep, inconsistent incompetence and failure? So joining me to talk about this and many other topics is economist and our friend, Bob Murphy. How you doing?
I'm doing great, David. How are you?
Great. It's great having you on. It's been a while since we've talked. My goodness. How long has it been? Years? I mean, on a radio format, right? Year and a half?
I think it may be.
So how are you doing?
Well, the best as we can given the situation.
So, I want to talk to you about a lot of different stuff in kind of a casual format. First of all, let's talk about, the big thing that everybody's still watching with horror and fascination about the fallout of the Afghanistan war. You are an economist. You have long critiqued our foreign policy from different vantage points, not just an economic vantage point and financial, but also a moral standpoint. What are you thinking? What are your thoughts on how you've seen this end of this war and the fact that it's unfolded in such a disastrous way as it's done?
I mean, I don't think I'm saying anything too profound here, but yes, it's, as you say, I was against the invasion in the beginning, certainly the continued occupation. I mean, this is where they say it's where empires go to die, and that's certainly panning out again, that aphorism. But it does seem to me that it's it almost looks like if they were trying to make it a debacle and to make it as crushing as possible in terms of the pullout, that's the way they're doing it makes sense. So the sort of conspiracy theorist who thinks Biden's taking his orders from China and this was done on purpose to embolden them, and so the American people would never support further U.S. military action. I mean, they have a plausible case to make. It almost looks like it was intentionally screwed up, and it's hard to know with the federal government, whether it's incompetence or intentional, but this is one of those cases.
Yeah, I mean, so what do you think is something that we can learn from this moment? Do you notice that it seems like people are learning from this mistake of interventionism, or do you think that the public is going to double down on wanting to get involved with more conflicts abroad, but just do it in a lighter touch way or something, not a full-scale occupation?
Right. So I understand the distinction you're making, and you're right. What I think probably guys like you and me, what this looks like is, or the obvious lesson here is this was a huge mistake. The U.S., government had no business with this long-term occupation, and Americans should never support something similar in the future. Let this be a warning. But unfortunately, I think, the neocons and people like that are going to spin this and say, see, the lesson here obviously is once you're in a place, you don't pull out prematurely. You got to stay till the job is done, and and so that means, anytime in the future someone wants to pull U.S. troops out of some location, they'll say, well, we don't want another Afghanistan, so let's leave the troops there. So, both sides are going to spin it to fit their preconceived narratives.
When you see that critique, do you share some agreement in the sense of, if you're going to pull out, you would probably want to pull out your allies and your own people first before you just leave all the equipment, like you were saying earlier?
Right. That's what I'm getting at. So it's, with a lot of this stuff, it's sort of like, there's no right way to do centrally planned economies, but yet when millions of people starve to death and like under Stalin or something, when he's clearly punishing political allies, or political enemies, you could say, well, that's clearly the bad way to do it. So it's not that there's a right way to, centrally plan agriculture, but when you're intentionally starving millions of your enemies, that's clearly not a good thing. So likewise here, given what I think was a huge blunder, both tactically and strategically and morally, of having an occupying U.S. force there for so long, given that you're there, then, what's the best way to pull it out? And it like I say, not that I'm a military expert, but clearly it looks like the way they did it was almost designed to maximize the debacle. And yes, they certainly could have changed the order in which they did things. It certainly seems, to most observers, such this wouldn't have been so just disastrous for everybody involved.
I wonder if again, I have no real evidence for it, just looking at the narrative, if some of the establishment in the military didn't want to leave if they wanted to leave in such a way to make Biden look bad, to say this is what it looks like for any other president who ever thinks about pulling out of troops when we start something, we're going to make you look so bad, and we're going to switch our little groupthink pressure on all of our little media mouthpieces that they were worshiping Biden's every move as long as he was intervening in this way and that way in our lives, especially with the public health stuff. But the moment he decided to do less intervention, in the case of Afghanistan, boy, they showed the power of the media. Boom! They start smashing and bashing at him. Obviously not to the degree they would have done if this was under like a Trump, who's a designated villain in their mind. But it was just a real interesting kind of show of cultural force on the pro-military establishment media complex to say, this is what we're going to leave our toys, make you look bad, bungle I'm not saying they did this on purpose, but the narrative is just right there. We're going to send a message if anybody ever wants to leave like this again.
Right. That's another plausible theory. And again, you and I are just, trying to make sense of this thing to assert some sort of rational actor involved, because this is such a debacle. It looks like, this couldn't have just been this stupid, right? This isn't due to pure incompetence. So yeah, like I said, I entertained the notion that maybe Biden really is controlled by the Chinese, and this certainly helps the Chinese communists. And so maybe he's taking a word from them. Or like you're saying, yeah, maybe the top military officials were against this pullout, and so they said, okay, you're going to order that? Well, then we're going to, we're going to hang this around your neck. It's going to be the worst political mistake of your career. But both of those narratives are implausible just because this was such a disaster and looked so bad on paper. You'd like to think that the U.S. military officials involved would not have, done something like that. But again, it's that they're protecting their turf, and obviously I'm not privy to what was said behind the scenes. Presumably they were telling him, let's not do it this way. But then, like you say, my understanding was Biden's official, like his advisors were telling him not to do it this way. But again, that's still consistent with your possible theory of, maybe the military, once they knew this was going to be the orders, decided to execute it in such a way as to make him look really bad.
Or at this point, Bob Murphy, we're going to have to probably expect to see a story emerge in the establishment press about, bats escaping from wet markets in Afghanistan as somehow kind of connected to this whole deal. Let's take a quick break and return live on A Neighbor's Choice to unpack more of these establishment conspiracy theories when we return with Bob Murphy. Check out his website, by the way, bobmurphyshow.com, where you can check his podcast and learn more about what he's doing. Back in a second.
A lawsuit is not something that anyone looks forward to. It's a stressful process. There are attorneys in Tampa Bay that keep clients well informed, creating less stress. That law firm is Catania. Personal injury law is definitive with full disclosure. There is no guessing game. If it's an auto accident, medical malpractice, nursing home negligence, unsafe working conditions, or motorcycle accidents, the law firm of Catania will handle the process worry-free from start to finish. Many victims don't realize they have a claim for the loss until they talk to Catania. They only represent private individuals and treat every case as if it's going to trial. Putting families first is more than just a slogan. It's their way of practicing law. It's a commitment to you. Remember, they don't get paid if you don't get paid. So go to Catania.com. over 28 years in practice. Catania personal injury, auto, and motorcycle accident attorneys. Catania, putting families first.
Office Tampa. Not attorney spokeswoman.
Hello, this is David Gronowski with A Neighbor's Choice. I've got a mission for you. I'm a big believer in eating family farm-raised, high-quality grass-fed beef. That's why I'm a frequent customer of White Oak Pasture, a sixth-generation beautiful farm in southwest Georgia. Support sustainable, delicious meat of the highest quality. Ask for White Oak Pasture's beef at your local grocery here in Florida, or go to whiteoakpastures.com, and first-time customers get 20% off on purchases with our exclusive coupon code NEIGHBOR. David Gronowski here. Let me tell you about a man named Gabriel. Every day, Gabriel puts on his boots and drives across America to make sure our store shelves stay stocked with the food people count on. See, Gabriel served our country overseas. He knows that America stands for freedom, quality, and caring for others the way we would like to be treated. That's why when Gabriel saw food shelves getting low during the pandemic, he hit the road as a driver with Oakley Transport. In the land of the free, where no one should go hungry, we need heroes like Gabriel to help keep America fed. CDLA driving professionals. Join Oakley Transport today. Keep America fed. Visit oakleytransport.com or call them today at 1-877-8-TANKER. That's 1-877-8-TANKER.
Fighting high electricity bills in this heat? Call Insulation Plus of Tampa at 813-951-4374. Insulation Plus of Tampa will do a free 10-point attic inspection and show you how adding insulation and solar fans will lower the temperature, which helps your air conditioner work more efficient and last longer. Call today for your free attic inspection and get 10% off an attic solar fan and free attic stairway insulator. Call Insulation Plus of Tampa at 813-951-4374. That's 813-951-4374 and start saving money today.
Neighbor's Choice returns. I'm your host, David Gronowski. We're here with Dr. Robert Murphy. He's the host of the Bob Murphy Show, their website, bobmurphyshow.com. It's a podcast. You can check it out, learn about the economic scene and what's going on in our markets. We're going to get to that in just a moment. But I do want to ask you, when you look at this Afghanistan thing and the ticket, you know, looks like $2 trillion in 20 years. Was the Afghanistan war a good economic investment for the American people?
Oh, I mean, I would say obviously not. It's, you know, and beyond just the direct monetary expenditures, of course, you know, the costs measured in other dimensions as well. Also, too, because in my mind, it's not simply a matter of, oh, well, we've got these benefits over here, but gee, was the price really worth it? Because it got to me, I think this makes us less safe, you know, what they did, you know. So, and there's, I'm sure you're familiar with Scott Horton. I don't know if you've had him on your show, David, but I mean, he documents quite well that this was Osama bin Laden's plan. Like that was the whole point, was to get America bogged down and to get them to overextend themselves in the Middle East. So, you know, this arguably was exactly what the enemy wanted in terms of Al Qaeda, was to get the U.S. to overcommit itself and, you know, end up looking foolish from the perspective of we're supposed to be the people, the global cop.
Right. So when you're seeing this situation unfold, do you think that we're going to enter a new era of global skepticism for America being the policeman anymore? Has the American police role kind of said, you know what, I think we're going to retire this role, or are they going to, or is the Western powers and so forth going to say, yeah, keep doing what you're doing, you're really credible at it?
Well, I saw the investor Jim Rogers say this several years ago, and I don't know if he coined this or if he just copied it from somebody else, but he was saying how the 19th century was the the British Empire, the British century. The 20th was the American, and he thought that the 21st was going to be the Chinese century, where they were going to be the global imperial force, as it were. And to me, that seems right. I think that that's correct. So, I'm sure future historians will quibble over the exact timing or whatever, but I imagine this debacle right now will be one of the milestones to say, this is clearly when we can clock that the American empire was over, and that the reins of power shifted to the Chinese. So again, it's not that it's just going to turn on a dime by next Thursday. The situation will be night and day difference. But I do think that the U.S. federal government has just been racking up incredible amounts of debt, and maybe you'll want to talk about that later. And much of which is owned by the Chinese authorities. Right. So, there's a sense in which they are literally acquiring ownership, in U.S. government assets. And so it's, yes, to answer your question, I do think that the American influence is on a downward trajectory. And this is just illustrative of that.
A commenter on our live stream says, there is no they, no one is in charge. The State Department is a bunch of starry-eyed D.C. urbanites who have no idea what the other is doing.
Yeah, like I say, with this stuff, one has to be careful and avoid the pitfall of any time something happens to it, that seems, quote, crazy, to try to attribute, malicious intent to, find some hidden actor behind the scenes. But sometimes, it really is just a crazy outcome because it's a screwy system and the incentives are all bad. That is true. On the other hand, though, like you were saying, it's no coincidence that the one time or the one type of thing where the mainstream media, and CNN in particular, did like Donald Trump and talked about how presidential he was, is when he's firing cruise missiles in the Middle East. That's the one time they thought he was acting presidential. And likewise here, that when Biden, who normally the press fawns over, is pulling troops out, then all of a sudden, serious questions emerge about Biden's judgment, and anonymous insiders give all this dirt. So, that's not a coincidence. I think that really is, due to the military-industrial complex, and there's lots of money to be made. It can be as simple as I think it's more complex than that. But just the hundreds of billions of dollars annually that are at stake here, people are willing to do all kinds of stuff for that much money. So that alone would explain some of this stuff that's going on behind the scenes and what people are willing to do to keep that money flowing.
Yeah, and it makes you wonder how sincere the media and the corporations are who promote the woke stuff when they talk about, or even Mark Milley saying, I'm really worried about white rage, but yet he wanted to spend, endlessly occupying people of color overseas, using force, brute force if necessary, to subdue them into, how in the world is that ever compatible with any notion of social justice? You've got to be literally insane to hold those ideas together, that you're for the oppressed, but yet you want to continually occupy, particularly people of color, is the countries that the American establishment in D.C. likes to perpetually control with brute force. So we'll take a quick break, and we're speaking with Bob Murphy. We're going to unpack the debt issue, the inflation issue, what's going on and what's to come with the economy from an Austrian perspective. Stay with us. More with Bob Murphy in just a second.
What's everyone saying about the all-new News Talk 1040 WHBO?
Talk radio is cool because everybody gets to give their opinion.
What I like about talk radio is that all of the broadcasters give their opinions, which helps educate me on the local news and current events.
That's what I like about talk radio, all the different opinions.
Current topics of the day.
Breaking news. They have probably the best news source.
Tampa Bay.
The news and talk of Tampa Bay.
I just love that station.
News Talk 1040 WHBO.
Around-the-clock flights in Cabo continue with an August 31st deadline looming for U.S. troops to leave. State Secretary Antony Blinken says at least 4,500 passport-holding Americans who voluntarily registered with the State Department have been airlifted out.
We're developing detailed plans for how we can continue to provide consular support and facilitate departures for those who wish to leave after August 31st.
Blinken says the embassy is trying to reach 1,000 other Americans believed to be still in Afghanistan and are in touch with 500 other U.S. citizens who indicate they want to leave. He called the situation fluid and hostile as the Taliban tightens checkpoints. CDC data showing daily deaths are up more than 280% in the U.S. in the last 6 weeks. The highly contagious Delta variant targeting the unvaccinated. Health experts say more Americans are choosing to get vaccinated, and companies are requiring employees to get the shot now that the FDA has fully authorized Pfizer's COVID vaccine. Michelle Franzen, ABC News.
News Talk 1040 Tampa Bay weather forecast.
All right, good afternoon. I'm meteorologist Alan Archer at your 1040 WHBO Weather Center. We'll keep an eye on only a small 20% chance of a shower or thundershower in from the east this afternoon. Partly sunny, stuffy, up to 94. The low tonight 75. But late tonight, especially after midnight and on through the day tomorrow, it's a 50% chance of scattered storms. The high tomorrow up to 92. I'm meteorologist Alan Archer for News Talk 1040 WHBO.
A Neighbor's Choice returns. I'm your host, David Granosky. Our website, aneighborschoice.com. That's aneighborschoice.com, where you can watch every episode of this live radio show Monday through Friday on demand as video or audio, or you can watch our online-only podcast, Things Hidden, as well as our health series, where we get into really deep dive discussions about nutrition and health and medicine with some of the most world-class minds in this topic. It's so exciting to have these discussions and see all the comments and engagement you guys provide. And we're joined now by a real friend of liberty, someone I've enjoyed talking to and learning from and reading his work, Dr. Bob Murphy, who's an economist in the Austrian School of Economics. So because of that, I wanted to turn to the other expert class, which is all the people telling us every day, don't worry, this inflation stuff, it's not a big deal. It's just temporary little thing. It'll be all go away. We're going to be okay. But this is something you've been warning about for some time. So what do you think is the case here with rising prices? I've seen rising prices in groceries and gas and different things like that. What's happening here?
Well, I mean, I think it's finally coming home to roost that this stuff, like, so a bunch of us, and I just do want to be clear on this, I don't want people to think that I'm Nostradamus by any stretch, that when the Fed started after the financial crisis in 2008, and the Federal Reserve at that point started doing rounds of what came to be dubbed as QE or quantitative easing, and at the time that was just unprecedented injections of what's called base money, the Fed just buying assets and creating dollars electronically to pay for them. And what they were, they doubled the Fed's balance sheet in a matter of months at that point, and then, continued with unprecedented expansions. And so a lot of economists, including me, were very concerned at the time about price inflation, but for a while it wasn't showing up, at least explicitly, in consumer prices. And I think that was partly, there's lots of factors, but I think one of the reasons was just it was showing up in asset markets, but the money wasn't in the hands of the general public, and people were scared they were going to lose their jobs and so forth. And so, it didn't make the price of bread go up dramatically, or gasoline didn't go up to $6 a gallon because there's a huge global recession at the same time. Whereas now, with the combination of supply being constrained because of, the lockdowns and related COVID measures, and everyone's still got plenty of money to spend because they're getting, it's much more liberal checks coming from various levels of government. And the Fed has, what they've done, what they did in 2020 made what they did earlier, the rounds of QE, pale in comparison again. And so it's like they just keep sort of breaking their own records and, making people's jaws drop anew. And so that combination of things that, yes, even though there are lots of statistical tricks that the government uses to sort of suppress the official inflation numbers, even by their own metrics, like it's price inflation, you know, at the consumer level is breaking 30-year levels, you know, 30-year highs and such, and is way above what the Fed says its own target is supposed to be.
So how can we avoid this kind? I mean, are we looking at a hyperinflation thing or some kind of other scenario that is happening, and how can we correct it? We just got to go through it, or innovate, create radical technologies. There's all these different little hopes that people have and fears. How do you see this playing out?
So, you know, when it comes to that term hyperinflation, you know, people invoke iconic images of people pushing wheelbarrows of cash in, you know, interwar Germany and, of course, Zimbabwe. I'm sure people have seen those pictures of the $50 trillion notes floating around and things like that you can get on eBay. So I do think we should be sort of have our feet grounded here that what the Fed has done so far, even if it were just to fully play out, if they didn't dump in more money, it would be bad, but it wouldn't be a hyperinflation. Like hyperinflation is when, you know, prices are doubling every week, things like that. And so that wouldn't happen if, like I say, the Fed were to just stop now and let this thing ride out. It would just, you know, it'd be much higher price inflation than Americans have been used to, at least since the 70s. But it wouldn't absolutely destroy the currency if they stopped now. The problem, though, is once you start going down this path, and coupled with the huge expenditures coming in particular from the federal government where they're running now, it's just a given that they're going to have, you know, multi-trillion-dollar deficits each year that, in my opinion, are being monetized by the Fed, and, you know, that's intentional to sort of hide the true cost of that. But once you have that dynamic in place, it's hard to walk away from it. It's what Hayek referred to as having a tiger by the tail. You know, just think through that metaphor. If you really were a tiger and you grabbed him by the tail and he's trying to bite you as he's turning his body to get you with his teeth, like his tail's pulling you away, but so you're in a really bad position, but you also can't get out of it, because if you let go, then you're dead. Mm-hmm. And so likewise, you know, and I think that's what Hayek was referring to in terms of this like inflationary spiral, where once you get into this rhythm where people, you know, their job isn't paying them enough, and so they're utterly dependent on checks from Washington just to make ends meet. But the only way Washington can afford to keep sending those checks is to have the Fed, you know, basically printing the money, you know, speaking loosely. You can't just say, okay, stop printing more money now, because then the pain would be unbearable. And so you fall in this position. And that's what happened too in, you know, interwar Germany, and that's what happened in Zimbabwe and so on. Like they didn't just decide on a Tuesday to destroy their currency for no reason. They got stuck in this pattern where they were printing money because prices kept rising, and so the government, to keep up with its expenses, had to keep printing more money, but that made prices rise faster, and they just kept trying to stay ahead of it until finally, you know, the currency crashed. So just, you know, back to your question about the U.S., it's not hopeless as of this moment if they were to all of a sudden turn around and start doing the right thing. But the reason they've been doing the wrong thing so long is because the system is screwed up. So I don't anticipate that they will do the right thing.
And by the right thing, are you meaning like full-on Ron Paul style right thing, or just like moderate right thing? To like how moderate of a course correction could they take to actually avoid a calamitous thing? I guess because everybody else is printing money out of thin air and so forth around the world too, that it kind of it buffers that, right?
Right. So it's a nuanced, or I'll give a nuanced answer. It's a difficult question because there's a lot of moving parts. So if they were to hold everything else constant, and then you say, okay, what should they do with the money? That, yeah, in my view, creating dollars per se does not make society wealthier, right? That doesn't make more cars, doesn't make more farmland, it doesn't give surgeons better skills, right? And so just creating more dollars does not make us wealthier. It just, it best rearranges the wealth. And particularly if it's the government that is the engine of these new dollars, then I would say it makes us poorer, because it's, you know, siphoning resources away from the private sector and political channels. So the quote, the right thing to do would be, yeah, just to stop creating new money, let prices adjust to the new, prices communicate information. And so people would say, oh my gosh, if they stop doing that, then, you know, interest rates would spike and this would happen. But right, but interest rates are providing information to people. Like if the patient is running 103 fever, you're not doing any favors by putting the ice cube on the thermometer to keep it down at, 98. You say, oh, we couldn't possibly let the thermometer spike to 103. No, if the patient is that sick, you need to know. And so likewise, if interest rates should be 8% right now, people need to know that. And the Fed, by suppressing them, isn't doing anybody any favors. But yeah, if they were to follow that advice, there would be a crash. But in my view, a crash is inevitable. It's the reason the economy is poised for a crash is because of all the malinvestments that have been made since the 2009 at least, with what I think is terrible Fed policy that's distorting interest rates. And so in the Austrian school framework, this is what causes the boom bust cycle, that it's easy money, artificially low interest rates that spawn malinvestments. That is the boom period where everything seems great, but it rests on quicksand. And then when the authorities chicken out and stop printing so much, yeah, interest rates spike and there's a crash, but it's not the cessation of monetary inflation that's the real cause. It's the earlier stuff, and that's just letting it, manifest itself. So if Ron Paul or someone like him were in charge, they could do other stuff that would mitigate it. They could cut taxes, they could cut spending, they could get rid of the FDA's regulations and things and bring down medical costs. So there's lots of other things they could do to cushion the blow. So on net, a liberty-minded political program wouldn't be so bad. But yeah, if they kept all the other crazy government stuff in place that cripples us and slamming the brakes, it would be bad. But it's going to be bad no matter what they do.
Yeah, and right on time, we've shifted into this cultural wackiness on the establishment institutions, media, and entertainment, where they're vilifying showing up on time. That's considered supremacy or racism to show up on time, to be punctual. Classical music is oppressive, to listen to that or to like that. Mathematics, showing work is considered racism and so forth. So there's like an attack on the very foundation of the building blocks of merit that we need now more than ever to outpace the blunder and debt and spending of our state, right?
Right. Yes. And so, yes, on the one hand, just to, endorse what you're saying there, it was amazing. I mean, you could sort of see it coming, but when they actually say it explicitly of how various things that I guess they're lumping in with, like, traditional patriarchal Christian, white European things, among which are, like you say, hard work and being punctual and whatnot. And so I think why they're doing that is because they don't want to give the impression that, the reason, this particular culture seems to have dominated the world isn't merely because of their, bloodthirstiness, but also because they actually have some objectively, good character traits. Maybe the Protestant work ethic isn't so bad, that kind of stuff. And so in an effort to, cut that narrative short, they have to just make it look like, anything associated with these is just, associated with whiteness and is therefore suspect. But you're right. It's all these things coming together at the same, like the economic situation, the Fed doing what it's been doing, that by itself is cause for alarm. And in fact, some of my colleagues and I, in 2008, 2009, we're going around giving lectures. I have PowerPoint presentations where I was explaining to regular people, here's what the Fed's doing. Here's why the housing crisis happened. This is setting us up for another crash. And that alone was really alarming to me. But like you're saying, David, in conjunction with these other things, and I know there's a lot of like right-wing culture warrior types who don't even know much about economics, and they can't believe how bad things are right now, and they think there's ticking time bombs in terms of, what's being taught at the schools. And oh my gosh, when this generation of kids is, comes of age in the next 10 years, they really have no idea. They don't know that boys and girls are different the way it's obvious to us. So, yes, all these things hitting at the same time, it's hard to even get your head around and to realize what's coming, but it's not going to be pretty.
Yeah, I mean, it's just right on time. The scapegoating narratives are more vicious than ever to divide us on every level. You've got, again, the racial division when we should be united, and especially the vast majority of people who have a heritage with Christianity and the Bible or the Torah, that we should be able to unite around our common upbringing of moral character and treating others the way we want to be treated, and family priority and all these different things. And yet it's like, as we wait for this ticking time bomb of this dollar crisis that you guys have been talking about for so long in your field in the Austrian school, it's just right on time. The scapegoat narratives are being set to make it even worse than it ever needed to be. Like, if we had a revival of Christian hunger right around this time of the debt crisis coming to pass or coming to a head, it would be a much better thing to navigate because people could work together through austere times. But these nihilistic folks just want to just drive us into hell on earth, it seems. And I guess they feel good about it. I don't know why they do what they're doing, but to tear people apart. We're all being victimized by this crooked system, and I guess its way of self-defense is to make us fight over who's the most victimized. Is it your gender? Is it my race? Is it your group? Is it this team? Which team of us is the most victimized? And then you fight over, that deal rather than saying, hey, we're all being screwed by this system. And nobody wants to have that conversation. You get that on the left, on the honest left, even though they have some Marxist sympathies, they're not as into the identitarian insanity. And you get that on some of the right, but you don't really have that conversation allowed to happen of say, hey, let's unite together against the unjust wars, the unjust prison state, the unjust nanny state, the unjust crooked corporatism that we see so prevalent today.
Right, and again, just to underscore, I think you're perfectly correct there, that you can sort of see it, just the hatred that you see on social media, and I recently tweeted out something like, wow, you guys hate each other so much right now, what are you going to do when the economy crashes? That, I think there's a sense in which, this hatred is being stoked for various reasons, but when things are still, you're still got a job and you can still put food on the table for your kids and whatnot, you're not going to do too much about that. But then if you've been primed to think the source of most of your problems is because of that group over there, and then times get really tough, right, and that's really a recipe for violence and destruction of property and so forth. And I think, like you say, that I think it's a combination. I think some people do know what they're doing and they do know how bad it's going to be and they relish it for various reasons. But I think a lot of them are just going along for the ride and they think it's, exhilarating or whatever, but they don't actually when we talk about let's kill all the rich people, we don't mean that literally. Well, if some rich people start, getting their homes ransacked and getting, hung up from telephone poles or whatever, then some people might pull back and say, oh, wait, maybe we should have toned down that rhetoric a bit.
Yeah, that's for sure. Let's take a quick break and return. We're speaking with economist Bob Murphy. You can go to his website, bobmurphyshow.com, to check out his podcast and his blog. We'll take a quick break and return in just a moment.
A lawsuit is not something that anyone looks forward to. It's a stressful process. There are attorneys in Tampa Bay that keep clients well informed, creating less stress. That law firm is Catania. Personal injury law is defended with full disclosure. There is no guessing game. If it's an auto accident, medical malpractice, nursing home negligence, unsafe working conditions, or motorcycle accidents, the law firm of Catania will handle the process worry-free from start to finish. Many victims don't realize they have a claim for the loss until they talk to Catania. They only represent private individuals and treat every case as if it's going to trial. Putting families first is more than just a slogan. It's their way of practicing law. It's a commitment to you. Remember, they don't get paid if you don't get paid. So go to Catania.com. Over 28 years in practice. Catania, personal injury, auto, and motorcycle accident attorneys. Catania, putting families first.
Office Tampa. Not attorney spokeswoman.
Are you ready to transform your career? Jess Smith was too. She was stuck on a job that was controlling her life, consuming her free time, and offering little opportunity for growing her pay. Then she found FinTech Mortgage Association, and she never looked back. FinTech Mortgage Association makes home lending simple, and they take care of home buyers like family. Using technology to make everyone's life easier, FinTech Mortgage Association equips each of their loan solutions architects with the tools they need to build a career with a schedule they control, a product they can take pride in, and an earning potential that is life-changing. Unleash your true potential. Join FinTech Mortgage Association. Visit finmay.com. That's FINMAE.com NMLSID.com. You're in charge now. NMLSID 1492187. Equal housing lender.
Hi, my name is Ryan Bourne.
And I'm Danica Bourne.
And we're the owners of South Coast Tax. We would like to thank our Lord for protecting us from evil. Psalm 91 states, He is my refuge and my fortress, for He will rescue us from every trap and protect us from deadly disease.
South Coast Tax are Christian-based tax accountants and attorneys who specialize in releasing bank levies, wage garnishments, and filing complex tax returns. We are the leaders in acceptance of offers and compromise with awesome results.
We are also a small firm who will treat you like family and not just a number.
Call us today at 1-800-TAX-1176 for a free consultation, and we'll take the time to explain all of the programs that you qualify for in order to allow you a fresh start.
In John 8:36, so if the Son sets you free, you will be free indeed. And one way we can achieve that is by being debt-free. So let us help you today. Call us at 1-800-TAX-1176, and together we can help achieve this goal by putting the IRS tax debt behind you for good. Again, that number is 1-800-TAX-1176.
A Neighbor's Choice returns. I'm your host, David Gronowski. We're speaking with Bob Murphy, an economist and a podcast host. So I wanted to ask you, when you're a funny guy, you like doing karaoke and joking, and you have a good sense of humor, and that's always apparent when you do your public engagements. Have you been able to maintain that spirit through all this heavy, constant inundation of negativity and politicization of everything? How have you been dealing with all of this over the last year and a half?
It's funny you said that, because as you were saying that, I was thinking, I bet you the listeners on this particular episode, David, don't think I'm very funny. That sounds really depressing. Yes and no. So like on social media or whatever, the proportion of my sort of dumb dad jokes, if you will, is probably higher than it used to be, partly because, when I see people just going at it and hating each other's guts, I think, geez, the best thing I can do right now is to crack a joke that is sort of, a generic thing that anybody can identify with, as opposed to, a joke at, look at how stupid these libs are. Look at how stupid these right wingers are. So I've been trying to do that, but it is, on the other hand, since I do think things really are serious, when I've been giving, for one thing, I haven't been giving too many public talks just because of, everything's shut down and people aren't holding events too much. But like, I was recently at the Mises Institute for, their annual event, their flagship event, Mises University. And I probably was not as jokey at that one, just because, I think things are serious now. And, I do want to convey that. So on the one hand, it's, you don't want to just be completely despairing that's not the right attitude either. You want to maintain hope, but because I don't just think this is, things are always like this and everyone's always thinking it's the end of the world, but don't worry, there's always tomorrow. I don't think that's the right attitude either. I think things really are pretty dark. Like we were talking about, there's 3 or 4 separate trends of different things, cultural, fiscal, so on, that any one of which would be pretty bad. And so when they all come together like this, there really is, I think the near term is pretty bleak right now.
And looking at our comments, JB says, Bob's great. Check out his book, Choice, very clear, accessible breakdown of human action. Another, Aaron says, Bob's Mises U lectures are what made me an anarchist, a great teacher, and a fun personality. Joseph says, suspicious elections, COVID, Afghanistan crisis, Green New Deal, woke theories, inflation, national debt, birth pains, time of sorrows, Black Horse Rider. So just taking it to a spiritual and cultural dimension for a moment. What do you think is unfolding here? We've seen that. One of the podcasts that we had together that people still talk about is, when we were talking about the Bible and we're talking about how Jesus came to end sacrifice, and yet it seems like the appetite for scapegoating and excluding and depersoning people is hotter than ever before. But at the same time, it feels like more people are waking up to that ugly reality of human nature and finally looking at it in the mirror after all this false sense of comfort that we've been in relatively in America.
Right. Yeah, you definitely. So, and I thank you. You're certainly one of the people who brought that scapegoating approach to my attention. My wife has been reading about that stuff and was telling me that you were pointing out when I didn't know you that well that, oh, look, check this guy out. He really knows what he's talking about. It's important. And yes, once you see that, you have that lens to look at events through, it really is shocking. I mean, just the obvious example, I'm sure you talk about it on your show all the time, but just the way now, if cases spike in a state, half the country is so quick to blame those moronic unvaccinated people who don't follow the science. And then if there's mask mandates for kids in school, the other half of the country is very quick to castigate these teachers who don't even follow, don't bother reading things, it's all emotional. So it really is, as things heat up and get bad, that the degree to which it's those people over there, they're the ones responsible for everything bad in my life right now, and I hate them and they're stupid and evil. That type of rhetoric is just so much more prevalent now than it was 2 years ago. And obviously the Trump administration and how the media treated him and the dynamic that established was part of it. But yeah, with this lockdowns and so forth, it's really just gotten amazing. And it, as you say, David, I remark all the time that what's helping me get through this is my personal faith and to realize this is sort of a mass hysteria, I guess you could call it. And I don't know how people are getting through this if they don't, believe that there's a just God who loves us, who's ultimately in control.
Yeah, it's a rocky time, but at the same time, it's also kind of the norm of most of human history. You look at people in the Old Testament, they had marauders coming by and raping and pillaging the town, and most of human history has had mortal danger of disease and fires and famine and locusts and so forth plaguing people on and off. They just didn't have this insufferable nanny state version like we have around the world now. But it's kind of back to the normal. It's not a new normal. It's the old normal. It's just these little busybodies want to really make it something that they can control so we can worship them. But I don't think it's going to work, as we've seen in history.
Right, and then lots of people are drawing parallels between, all the fall of the Roman Empire, and then, there's respects in which the decline of the British Empire is similar to what's happening here in terms of, military and financial strength. And yeah, as you say, to go back to just the scapegoating framework that you see it all the time with people. Oh, these Trump supporters are going to be at this MAGA event and they're not wearing masks. Well, there's the Darwin Awards, like that thing about the Darwin Award, and they pass that around as if it's some cheeky thing when they're literally celebrating people dying is what is what that means, So it's that's scapegoating 101 right there, and it is amazing how much there's been a resurgence of that. And like you say, it's human nature, and shows, I guess, the extent to which Jesus' example has not fully percolated through people.
Well, Bob, it's been great catching up with you, and under dark circumstances or not, it's always great learning from you. So thank you for joining us, and we want to continue following your work.
Thanks for having me, David. And thanks for all you do.
And check out bobmurphyshow.com to listen to his podcast, and check out his blog on there as well, bobmurphyshow.com. I'm David Gronowski. That's it for Hour 1. We'll return with Tucker Goodrich to learn about vegetable oils in Hour 2 of the show. Stay with
us. Talk and information. 1040 WHBO Pinellas Park. Tampa Bay's all new News Talk 1040.
It's the only way I get news.
From ABC News, I'm Michelle Franzen. U.S. troops and coalition forces continuing airlifts out of Kabul's airport, with nearly 90,000 already evacuated since August 14th.
This is one of the largest airlifts in history. A massive military, diplomatic, security, and humanitarian undertaking.
That's State Secretary Antony Blinken. He says the evacuations are taking place under hostile conditions, with the Taliban controlling checkpoints. He estimates out of 6,000 Americans there, 1,500 remain.
The U.S. State Department saying its work isn't done even after the last American troops leave next week.
There is no deadline on our work to help any remaining American citizens who decide they want to leave to do so.
Secretary of State Antony Blinken saying that also goes for Afghans who helped the U.S. in the last 20 years. It's not clear how the U.S. can help without troops left to enforce the evacuations. Andy Field, ABC News, Washington.
Both Republicans and Democrats are criticizing the Biden administration for the chaotic situation. There is also agreement. A secret trip made by two House members should not have happened.
Today, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi blasting Representatives Peter Meyer and Seth Moulton for taking an unauthorized trip to Kabul, Afghanistan.
Because there's a call on our resources, diplomatically, militarily, and the rest in the region as well.
Pelosi also warning other lawmakers from doing something similar.
This is deadly serious. We do not want members to go.
Alex Perche, ABC News, Washington.
Johnson & Johnson releasing details about its COVID booster shot study, indicating the extra dose raises antibody levels about 9-fold. ABC's Sony Salzman says data that the FDA will review.
This will help them offer a recommendation for all 3 vaccines, probably boosting sometime around 8 months after you received your initial vaccination.
More than 100,000 Americans are hospitalized nationwide with COVID-19. You're listening to ABC News.
Do you check your Google search results regularly? You should. People often get their first impression of you or your business online. Negative comments on the internet can impact your life and your livelihood. Take control of your online reputation. Get your free reputation report card at reputationdefender.com. It may reveal negative posts from an ex-employee, upset patient or client, news article, legal issue, or even exposed personal information right there in your Google search results. Uncover what's lurking on the internet about you with reputationdefender.com's patented scan and get your free reputation report card. Or for immediate assistance with your reputation, call 800-401-6681. Our cutting-edge technology helps make your Google search results look their best. Call 800-401-6681. That's 800-401-6681. 800-401-6681. Or take the free scan at reputationdefender.com.
China lashing out ahead of the anticipated U.S. intelligence report on the origins of the coronavirus. Came from Director General of China's Foreign Ministry, Fu Song. He's accused the U.S. of playing politics.
Their purpose is to shift the blames onto China. And that is a game we're not prepared to play.
The report meant to help resolve disputes among intelligence agencies about how the coronavirus emerged, including one theory: the virus leaked from a lab in Wuhan where infections first emerged. Extreme heat once again bearing down on parts of the West.
With temperatures in Phoenix expected to be between 106 and 114 degrees, popular hiking trails are again being shut down. It's part of a new test program to prevent hikers from being overcome by the heat and needing to be rescued. This hiker out today says it's not safe to hike the trails when the sun is up on hot Phoenix days, and many tourists get caught off guard.
We come at 4 o'clock every Wednesday morning. It's just too hot to come any other time.
Most years, firefighters are executing several rescues every day on the trails. Alex Stone, ABC News.
In some Midwest states, farmers say the major drought that has blanketed much of the U.S. is damaging their crops. The Ag Department says 63% of the spring wheat crop is in poor or very poor condition compared to 6% last year. This is ABC News.
The pandemic's reminded us we live in a sea of airborne germs that can assault us with every breath. Your nose is the body's first line of defense by helping filter out allergens, bacteria, and viruses before they reach your lungs. So how do you clean your nose? Navage uses powered suction to flush out mucus and germs that cause congestion or worse, can make you sick. Over 2 million people use Navage to breathe better, sleep deeper, snore less, and feel healthier without drugs. Go to Navage.com or find Navage at Walgreens, CVS, Rite Aid, Bed Bath, and Target.
I'm Michelle Franzen, ABC News.
News Talk 1040, Tampa Bay weather forecast.
All right, good afternoon. I'm meteorologist Alan Archer at your 1040 WHBO Weather Center. We'll keep an eye on only a small 20% chance of a shower or thundershower in from the east this afternoon. Partly sunny, stuffy up to 94. The low tonight 75. But late tonight, especially after After midnight on through the day tomorrow, there's a 50% chance of storms. The high tomorrow up to 92. I'm meteorologist Alan Archer for News Talk 1040 W.
Whatever's on your mind.
There's something new in American popular culture.
For everyone.
Real people, real conversation.
Normal conversations that I'd have with my friends every day.
The basis of conversation in the community.
When Tampa Bay comes home. News Talk 1040 WHBO.
This portion of the upcoming amazing broadcast is brought to you by the law firm of Catania & Catania, award-winning personal injury, auto, and motorcycle accident attorneys, serving Tampa Bay families for over 28 years.
A Neighbor's Choice is live, and I'm your host, your neighbor, David Gronowski. So glad to be with you again for another hour of our broadcast live, where we're on radio, FM, AM, from the heart of Central Florida. And make sure if you're listening in the Tampa Bay area that you set it to this station. This is your go-to home station for drive time news and comment, with world-class thinkers and great minds helping you with all kinds of topics relevant for your life. That's the key here. We don't want to just blather on and on and on about Team Red versus Team Blue. What a waste of time. We've got things to do. Got to stay out of debt. Got to get our health and nutrition in order. That's why we're going to hear from our good friend and nutrition researcher Tucker Goodrich. He'll be joining us soon, later in the broadcast today. But we take a 360 approach, if you want to put it that way. Everything integrated, neighbor to neighbor. Got to take care of your wealth. Got to take care of your health. Got to take care of your family. That's why we get out of government schools and get into a quality education. We don't play around with garbage vegetable oils for our kids. We know that that's worse than cigarettes in a lot of ways in terms of long-term damage to their growth and mental health and hormones and their oxidative stress and setting them up for diseases and obesity. Why would you do that? So there's no point in giving kids, fried foods and vegetable oils. You can if you want French fries for your kids, you take some organic potatoes, you peel them, slice them up, fry them in some beef tallow, put a little sea salt on it. That's delicious. They won't want the garbage that, a lot of the vegetable oil companies, restaurants serve after that. But that's what we have to do. We have to give a 360 perspective, all angles that integrate to your life, because we don't want to waste our time talking about this team needs to win in this election and that's all that matters. That's what a lot of talk radio does. Hey, just got to get these people in and we'll cut the taxes by 1%. Oh, come on. You guys are playing on such an old paradigm that never was relevant. It's certainly not relevant now, when you have people trying to create a two-tier society based on those who are gladly willing to be jumping into the arms of big pharma for life just to have the status quo for their life returned to them. I mean, what is this, Stockholm Syndrome? We can't put up with this. Nobody wants to put up with this in their right mind. People who are deluded by mania, they're going to be caught up in it, but we have to be able to do something better than that. Aaron sends us an email to the show. Love the show, David. I've recently discovered your show and really enjoy it. Keep up the good work. I'm an agnostic atheist, but I do not believe in the Church of Scientism that so many of my supposedly rational friends do. I feel that I reject the current march towards the Church of Scientism more than many of my Christian friends and family do. I still don't understand why a skeptic like you embraces Christianity, but I hope to find out why. Well, that's a good message, Aaron. And it reminds me of something I posted that I wrote a year ago today, August 25th, 2020. Fear is the lifeblood of tyrants. And who is the person in history who tells us not to fear? That's Jesus, right? It says, fear not. The idea of not fearing is essential to understanding why people would want to imitate Jesus. and actually the space that we enjoy and take for granted in our culture of being able to treasure and respect skeptics comes from our inheritance of Christian culture. That is, Jesus imitating culture is what provides the cultural tradition of respecting and even providing extra weight and honor sometimes to skeptics. Skeptics who are willing to challenge the sacred cows of our current culture, or any culture for that matter. Skeptics are never in a good spot, okay, even when they were in cultures that were ostensibly Christian. Because anytime you go against the crowd, they're going to get in a stupor of rage and, right, moo at you and try to knock you out. Ask Tesla, ask Galileo, ask all the people that ever did something great or said something powerful or beautiful in the midst of stupidity and mimetic groupthink. So that's always a tough place to be. But the fact that there was a place at all that societies would even operate with normalcy, the idea that, hey, we're going to give a little bit of a sacred respect for the contrarians, the skeptics among us, is something that comes from Christianity. That's what happens when you get a story in which, for the first time in history, whereas all other cultures around the world told the story of their world based on the idea that the winning crowd might makes right, and their story is that they can sacrifice whoever they want to for the greater good, or to appease the gods, or to propitiate their demands. For the first time in history, the camera was taken away from the winner's crowd and given to the person they were persecuting, and that was Jesus. So you got to see the role of the scapegoat, the role of the person selected for sacrifice, and you got to see the same old story of a community coming together to solve their problems by blaming and casting out an individual. But this time the camera, instead of it being held by the crowd, the camera was held by those who were sympathetic to the target of the crowd's wrath, to the person rather than the collective. This is why I call Jesus' movement the personhood revolution, because it ushers in the idea of a human person in the first place having a sacredness in and of himself, no matter where he was born or she was born, whatever privilege or status they were born into. It didn't matter. It didn't matter if they had a disease. In the ancient world, if you had diseases, you were considered unclean and unloved by the gods and a disgrace to be stayed away from and maybe pitied, but it was to be lorded over if you were to be pitied. There certainly wasn't the deep love and solidarity that Christianity introduced to human history. And now our public health institutions try to imitate that aesthetic of Christianity so that they can tell you, we will lock down the world and sacrifice millions just to save one life from sacrifice from this disease. And you say, how does that even make sense? Well, it doesn't. It's trying to take the same sacrificial violence that stamped out and stomped out skeptics of the status quo in history, but it's trying to do so in a way that tries to imitate Jesus's movement, which has a concern for the contrarian, a concern and respect for the person. It doesn't make that all contrarians are therefore right. No, that's not what we're saying. It's the idea of having intellectual and mental and cultural space and having the intellectual humility to recognize when you're wrong and to not use coercion and force to hide our ability to know when we're wrong. That's the problem we have in our society today. Our institutions and government officials and public health officials, they don't want to know what's wrong. They don't want to have self-reflection. They don't want to look in the mirror and say, oh my goodness, we've gotten this totally wrong. We've gotten this military adventurism in Afghanistan wrong. We've got this inflation, printing money out of thin air for decades and decades. We've got that wrong. The public health equation of, hey, we're going to tell you what's good for you to eat. And they got that wrong for generations, to the point of millions of people having horrible deaths with chronic diseases and being set up for failure with infectious diseases like we see happening today. They got so many things wrong because they do not have the imitation of Jesus in mind in its fullness. And so when you ask me, why am I a skeptic? And how could I possibly be a skeptic while wanting to imitate Jesus? And I simply don't know any other way in which I could be a skeptic, but because of the long tradition of folks trying in fits and starts to imitate Jesus. I'm David Gronowski. We'll take a quick break and return live on A Neighbor's Choice. You can call in at 727-587-1040. That's 727-587-1040. Or shoot us an email, hello@aneighborschoice.com, or our comment stream on our video stream. You can interact with us there. Back in a second.
A lawsuit is not something that anyone looks forward to. It's a stressful process. There are attorneys in Tampa Bay that keep clients well informed, creating less stress. That law firm is Catania. Personal injury law is defended with full disclosure. There is no guessing game. If it's an auto accident, medical malpractice, nursing home negligence, unsafe working conditions, or motorcycle accidents, the law firm of Catania will handle the process worry-free from start to finish. Many victims don't realize they have a claim for the loss until they talk to Catania. They only represent private individuals and treat every case as if it's going to trial. Putting families first is more than just a slogan. It's their way of practicing law. It's a commitment to you. Remember, they don't get paid if you don't get paid. So go to Catania.com. Over 28 years in practice. Catania, personal injury, auto, and motorcycle accident attorneys. Catania, putting families first.
Office Tampa. Not attorney spokeswoman.
Hello, this is David Gronowski with A Neighbor's Choice. I've got a mission for you. I'm a big believer in eating family farm-raised, high-quality grass-fed beef. That's why I'm a frequent customer of White Oak Pasture, a 6th-generation beautiful farm in southwest Georgia. Support sustainable, delicious meat of the highest quality. Ask for White Oak Pasture's beef at your local grocery here in Florida, or go to whiteoakpastures.com, and first-time customers get 20% off on purchases with our exclusive coupon code NEIGHBOR. Who is your neighbor? Dave and Wally are team drivers for Oakley Transport. One day, they came across a very serious accident on the highway. Some might pass on by, but Dave and Wally saw there was no time to waste. They jumped into action and saved 2 people's lives with moments to spare. That's the kind of courageous love we need more of today. It reflects the respected culture Oakley Transport develops with their driving professionals. CDLA licensed drivers. Join Oakley Transport today for a rewarding career. Visit oakleytransport.com. That's oakleytransport.com.
Fighting high electricity bills in this heat? Call Insulation Plus of Tampa at 813-951-4374. Insulation Plus of Tampa will do a free 10-point attic inspection and show you how adding insulation and solar fans will lower the temperature, which helps your air conditioner work more efficient and last longer. Call today for your free attic inspection and get 10% off an attic solar fan and free attic stairway insulator. Call Insulation Plus of Tampa at 813-951-4374. That's 813-951-4374 and start saving money today.
So absent of fear, you have the full confidence and courage to do what's right. And that means to be a skeptic in the true sense of the word. A true skeptic is someone who is suspicious of the mimetic groupthink myths and rituals of their day. It's easy to do the fake woke stuff where you just, I'm going to go and tell past generations, I'm so much better than you. Let's tear down their statues. Let's tear down everything. We're so much better. That's the same dumb joke that every dupe and useful idiot in history has always done, where they believe they're immune and they're ignorant from the lessons of history. And it's because they don't want to reckon with the power of what Jesus did in history, which is to get us to see that no, evil is not between that team and my team. Think about when Jesus was dealing with his own people, they were oppressed by crooked local leadership and the biggest empire the world had ever known, which was very brutal and very uncaring about health or wellness or your emotional needs or anything. They didn't care. And he was dealing with people who were oppressed, demoralized, and he spend all that time saying, we're better, let's go get our power? No, he didn't do that. He spent time talking to those people who were oppressed and getting them to look in the mirror and see how their own idols and their own aspirations were still repeating the same mistakes of those who were oppressing them. Talk about skeptic. I mean, he's the one that dealt with the whole paradigm of groupthink of his time and upset the hierarchies of who's in and who's out, who's clean and who's unclean, who's got the right to speak and who doesn't. And that was so revolutionary. And we've 2,000 years from that, we're so far removed and so baked in the afterglow of his infection in history at that moment in time and in this time, that we are so spoiled by that, we don't know how much of that came from him in his movement. And to be able to have, so when we talk about Christianity, what most people think of as Christianity today is more like Gnosticism or dualism, some kind of Neoplatonic, battle between a good deity and a villain arch nemesis. And these ideas of Greek Hades and all these things that get smuggled into common understandings and interpretations of Christianity. And so, of course, you always have to distinguish between the institutions that want to use the brand Christianity. They're going to get things wrong or get things right. And then what the heart and soul of Christianity is, which is to imitate Jesus. That doesn't mean imitate Jesus. See, most Christianity conceptions, they treat Jesus like he's another God. They're just supposed to, okay, who's the great Hercules or who's the great guru of our time? And I'm just going to say how great they are. No, that's not what Jesus wants us to do. He wants us to emulate and imitate what he does in his attitudes. And that includes our skeptical attitudes that we should have for the high priests of our time, because the high priests of our time, they don't present themselves as religious. They present themselves as things like public health. They present themselves as things like academic experts in universities that cannot be questioned. And they present themselves as, foreign policy gurus on TV who are constantly selling you on why you need to go send your kids and your money to some other place around the world to remake them into, some kind of French postmodern third wave feminist theory or something. This is completely insane. And if you were imitating Jesus, you would know and you would have his same discernment and be able to cut through the dialectic of our time and wrestle with paradox. The paradox of things is being able to love your neighbor as yourself, to be able to love someone who is hopelessly lost in a sea of lies propagated by a failing media establishment, and to truly love them while at the same time not excusing or enabling the coercive desires that they might be infected with because of the spirit of the age. That's paradox, being able to balance that, right? Because some people want to say, nope, you got to beat them and otherize them and dehumanize them faster than they can do that to you. That only makes more problems. And then other people say, nope, you can never correct them because loving someone is just, you just don't ever bring up the errors. And even if it means people are going to be hurt because of their actions and their policy desires, just no. So you have to have that paradox, that balance, the weighing of two things. And that's the way of imitating Jesus. Aaron says on our comment stream, when you look at it that way, our current situation doesn't feel so hopeless. Skeptics are louder than ever. That's right. Because gospel, which is the good news that Jesus ushered into history, it goes along with, and see, this is where it's interesting, because people like to say that the gospel is against technology. It's not. It's actually the birthplace of why we've had so much acceleration in technological development and scientific development. Because as Gerard says, we didn't stop burning witches because we invented the scientific method. We stopped burning witches. We discovered the scientific method because we stopped burning witches, meaning that we had to have a cultural signal entered into history that would get us to lose our appetite to continually use collective violence to solve problems like disease or plagues or famines or so forth, in order for us to get to the point where we would start to say, well, let's not burn this witch for the 50th time, this other person. Maybe we should look for a natural explanation for why we have this problem. And so human beings, their default is to go to a social explanation whenever there's a problem, to try to blame somebody. That's their knee-jerk. Blame. Right? Blame. Blame. You know, when you have two kids fighting and you address the kid, that one of the kids, first thing is blame. They did it. They started it. This. None of the kids stop first and say, well, actually, there's a scientific explanation for this. They perceive the way I looked at them to be that of a slight. And mother, it's not. It's actually that I just had something in my eye. And so their mirror neurons saw my perception, my face, and they thought that I was indicating to them aggression. And so therefore, Mom, they started to say something mean to me. But at the time that happened to me, I hadn't eaten in 8 hours, and I typically eat a lot of sugar, Mom, and I hadn't had my sugar. So ghrelin was actually making my stomach hungry and causing aggressive hormones to kick off and make me a little snippy when they started to aggress. And so, Mom, I just got caught up in the mirror neuron dance of our, that's not what children do when they're confronted with conflict, and neither is it what human beings do when they're confronted with calamity, like disastrous failed wars or crooked economies falling apart, or, public health disasters when people fund, reckless experiments using other people's money in dentist level security labs in China and so forth. When things like that happen, all people do is blame. Well, it's these. If you say it's from China, that means you're racist. Blame. Or or some people were scapegoating the Chinese community apparently, and saying, "Oh, you guys caused it because the television told us it was bat soup that caused this," because the television was lying and deflecting and putting blame somewhere else than where the evidence was leading to this thing coming out of, right? So there's all these different layers of blame games going on. And we have to be skeptical of all of these groupthink contagions, these viral groupthink narratives that we bring with us along the way, and shape our attitudes and shape our spirit, shape our emotions towards darkness and defeatism and hopelessness. So you must maintain the mindset of Christ if you are to be the true skeptic who leads your family and your community and your neighborhood and eventually the world towards a better direction. It has to be from your spirit, your mindset. That's why you're able to be skeptical of settled science claims, because oh, no, that's not something separate. That's the same religious groupthink that Jesus was deconstructing in his time. And so once you see that and imitate from the master skeptic, you're able to bring that into your world with wisdom. Back in just a moment with Tucker Goodrich to apply this concept in real time.
If you're not scared of COVID,
they are waiting for hours.
Dangerous and life-threatening.
The Afghan withdrawal.
You should wear a mask.
It's a crazy world.
Delta variant surges.
The Taliban says we are going to see flooding.
Coming across our border, history will be watching.
Frustrated and scared.
Deeply saddened by the facts.
It's our national security.
What's coming next?
When you have people indoors.
We are here to help you survive it. News Talk 1040. WHBO.
Secretary of State Antony Blinken says about 4,500 Americans have been airlifted out of Afghanistan since evacuations began in earnest on August 14th. He says the State Department's now trying to confirm the identities and the status of about 1,000 others.
There could be other Americans in Afghanistan who never enrolled with the embassy, who ignored public evacuation notices, and have not yet identified themselves to us.
The U.S. is set to leave Afghanistan on August 31st. That's less than a week from now. More than 6 years in prison for a Michigan man who plotted to kidnap Governor Gretchen Whitmer. Ty Garbin pleaded guilty, saying he was upset over state-ordered COVID-19 restrictions. Johnson & Johnson is testing a second booster dose of its COVID-19 vaccine.
This will help them offer a recommendation for all 3 vaccines, probably boosting sometime around 8 months after you received your initial vaccination.
ABC's Sony Salzman on what it means for the FDA. Record closes for the S&P and the NASDAQ. Daria Albinger, ABC.
News Talk 1040, Tampa Bay weather forecast.
All right, good afternoon. I'm meteorologist Ellen Archer at your 1040 WHBO Weather Center. We'll keep an eye on only a small 20% chance of a shower, thundershower in from the east this afternoon. Partly sunny, stuffy up to 94. The low tonight 75. But late tonight, especially after midnight and on through the day tomorrow, it's a 50% chance of scattered storms. The high tomorrow up to 92. I'm meteorologist Ellen Archer for News Talk 1040 WHBO.
Neighbor's Choice returns. I'm your host, David Gronowski. Our website, aneighborschoice.com. You can also subscribe to our video stream to catch us daily on video and interact with us at Rumble. Just search for A Neighbor's Choice on Rumble, where you can watch us video stream in a free speech friendly atmosphere. You talk about free speech friendly. CDC says vaccine efficacy diminishes to 66%. For this new variant. That's according to MSN.com or Bloomberg. So, that would have got you probably blocked or banned on this platform and many other platforms until the gods from CDC say it. It's ridiculous. They've tried to stifle the scientific debate completely on almost every level. The most hubristic attack against science I've ever seen in history, I would say, coordinated by a bunch of lemmings and Luddites who don't really have respect for science. They don't have respect for ethics, and they just want to shove down people who dissent and stifle and delete until their gods, their designated gods, who are just bureaucrats with no skin in the game, make their edicts, and then they say, okay, now you can talk about it. And sometimes you still can't. And so that's what happened with the lab leak. Remember, everybody kept saying there's a lab leak, and they said, nope, not allowed to talk about it. We'll delete it. Delete it, delete it, delete it. So these people want to have state-controlled speech with corporations kind of setting the frame. There's a debate about who's really running the show. Some people think these giant corporations are really dictating to the states the terms of this deal. Other people say, no, they're just reacting to the edicts from the Biden administration or whatever. So it's hard to sort out. I don't really care, but we know it's a rotten deal. Joining us now to talk about nutrition and health and the failure of experts is our friend Tucker Goodrich. How you doing, Tucker?
Good, David. How are you? So you're listening to you just now brought a word to mind, samizdat, S-A-M-I-Z-D-A-T. It was dissident activity across the Eastern Bloc under the Iron Curtain, in which individuals reproduced censored and underground publications, often by hand, and pass the documents from reader to reader. And we're literally at that point in the United States with our health information, where the state determines what's true and what's not true, and it's often not correct. And if you want to, try and convey accurate information like they had to in the Soviet bloc, you have to figure out some underground way to do it or how to get around the censors. It's a pretty sad state of affairs, honestly, in the United States. Very disappointing. And on that note, so unfortunately, this doesn't always only happen in COVID-19. It happens in health and nutrition all the time. People have gotten blocked. I mean, Dr. Mercola, who produces a lot of controversial material, and I'll be frank, some material I don't think is accurate, but also some that is, has, been forced to remove a lot of his content for fear of having his business shut down. And David, are you there?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, okay. On that note, so my little experience recently, I think I mentioned this a while ago about a blog called The Diet Doctor, which claims to be the #1 keto and low-carb site in the world, run by Andreas Enenfelt, who's a Swedish doctor. And they have a podcast run by Brett Scher, who's interviewed me in the past and who I thought was a pretty open-minded guy. And I went through and looked at their post on seed oils. They said, are seed oils dangerous? And I posted a bit of a critique of it on Twitter, noting that a lot of what they said was inaccurate and that they were not accurately representing the science, and offered to help them do a better job of it and correct some of their misinformation. And they turned around and interviewed 6 people, myself not included, and it was unbelievable listening to this podcast, the Diet Doctor podcast. I think it's episode 78 that came out, because the first 2 quote-unquote experts they interviewed, one was a cardiologist at University of California, San Francisco, I believe, and the other was a PhD and dietitian. And both of them said they knew very little about this topic. Right? These were their 2 experts. The first 2 people they talked to both admitted that they knew very little about the topic, but then assured everybody that there was nothing to worry about. Nevertheless, the fact that they didn't know anything about it, which quite astonished me. Why on earth would medical professionals not want people to know what the scientific literature has to say about our health, and why would they misrepresent it? Because, I mean, at this point, I pointed out that what they said was wrong, and, why would they continue to misrepresent what the scientific literature says? They didn't address directly any of the points that I brought up. They did, to their credit, the day after I started critiquing their seed oil position, add a disclaimer to it, and that gave me some hope. But what they wound up doing was quite disappointing. Although they did have a couple of, they had a scientist on later in this podcast, Ben Bickman, who I have a lot of respect for, who went through some of the experiments that he's done in his own lab, looking at these seed oils and the effects they have. And, he was, within the limits of his personal experience, he was pretty cautionary, let's say, about what happens in the body, and noting that these effects are very negative. But
what did he look at specifically, by the way, just to give a little detour?
Well, he looked, one of the problems in obesity is that your fat cells become dysfunctional. And so he did an experiment in his lab where he subjected some of these fat cells to these omega-6 toxins and looked at what happened to them. And it, that's what induces this dysfunction that we see in obesity in this model that he was using, right? The fat cells are no longer able to function correctly. They can't subdivide when there's more energy, and they wound up getting big and inflamed, which is what we see in, most overweight Americans, which is at this point, basically most Americans. And, his comment was, this is not good, what's happening here. And he's a very open-minded guy. And, in my point of view, he should have been the first guy they presented in this podcast. Instead, most people are going to listen to two quote-unquote experts who admit they know nothing about the topic. So why are they first? Why are they presented as, authorities on this matter? It's mystifying. It really is mystifying. But it's nothing more but another indication that we've really got to look out for ourselves. We've really got to look to samizdat forms of information and figure out who you can and can't trust. And it's really sad that we can't, trust our professional classes to deal straight with the evidence and with the information that affects our lives and our health. But we apparently can't.
That's why I'm the guy that actually, gets into anthropology and applies it to things like economics and current events and nutrition science, because it's the only way. If we don't have that big picture view, then we'll be always reacting to the latest blunder. Oh, hey, look, a public health official paradigm just got blown up again. How'd that happen? Whoa. They said the war in Afghanistan would never go wrong. They had all the evidence. Whoa. And then you go look over here. They said the housing market would never crash. Whoa, it did. They just go on and on and on, and we don't learn to study history, and even deeper than that, anthropology, to say, okay, why are humans the way they are? Because they keep doing this same stuff where they create this little sacred clique, and they're smart guys and girls in these cliques and stuff in these different fields of knowledge, but they don't have competition because it's so monopolized by government funding on the state, local, federal level that they don't know what they don't know. I think that's the problem here. I mean, we're talking about epistemology here, so how we know what we know, in other words. How do we know what we know is true? And I think that's the problem here.
There's a fantastic book by a gentleman by the name of Paul Johnson, and the title is Intellectuals. And what his book about is how intellectuals constantly make this mistake. Like a lot of scientists and physicians, they get expertise in some narrow range of human knowledge, and they do it through a lot of work, hard work often, and then they assume that because they are experts in this one narrow area, that they are therefore entitled to pontificate on everything else that's unrelated. And that's, as Johnson points out in this book, which was, I think, published in the 1990s, maybe the 1980s, why they are so dangerous, because then you get these gullible journalists who come along and say, oh, Paul Krugman was an expert in this very narrow field of economics and justly won a Nobel Prize, and therefore he's entitled to pontificate about everything under the sun. But, they typically don't exercise the same degree of care that they did in their specialty when they're pontificating about everything else. And we all have to be aware of that just because, that this seems to be a basic human failing, that when you know something really deeply, that doesn't mean you know anything else really deeply, and it means you're subject to the same sort of intellectual failings that, Johnson was describing decades ago. Right? So when somebody tells you, oh, this is not a problem, but I don't know anything about this subject, your first question should be, well, why are you talking about it?
Right. And the problem is, if you know something in isolation, then do you really know it, right? That's the other part of it, right? Because you need context. That's absolutely true. Yeah, if you're a cardiologist and you're like, okay, I'm just going to study this thing here, but I'm not going to learn about what Tucker's talking about with seed oils or whatever, then you're just reacting to a context that doesn't need to exist, because there's an environmental factor that you're missing, because all you're looking at is this organism as a machine, and you're an expert on all the different things, but you don't know how to. I don't know. I need to come with a better analogy, but
no, I mean, that's even worse, honestly, because the cardiology profession, two of these doctors were cardiologists. And all I'm doing is quoting chapter and verse from the literature produced by the cardiology profession since the 1970s, right? Nothing I say is in any way controversial to anybody who spends some time reading the literature in their specialty. So they don't even know their own specialty well enough to turn around and say, oh, yeah, this is clearly, a major problem, and it would make sense that this is the reason why cardiovascular disease, which used to be rare or unknown in most countries, is now our number one killer, right? I mean, unfortunately, a physician often, they're paid to treat sick people. Treat does not mean cure, right? And they are not paid to help you or me avoid becoming a patient. They don't care about that. Why should they care about that? They want to figure out, what can we give these people who are already sick to perhaps help them out a little bit and get paid, right? And unfortunately, the get paid part of it is super key. And there's not much information. There's no money. If you're a physician, there's no money in telling people how not to become your patient. And there are some physicians who, figure out a way to do it, like Dr. Atkins, who turned himself from a cardiologist into effectively a diet and obesity doctor. But most physicians don't do that. And it's a real shame. And, it's a real problem. I mean, my background on Wall Street, we lived under the supervision of the Securities and Exchange Commission, which was created back in the 1930s because Wall Street was considered untrustworthy, justifiably often so. And, this goes against my libertarian bent, but we need something like the SEC to look over the medical profession because they are, according to some folks, the number one cause of death and disability in the United States. And I think that's a pretty easy case to make. And they're entirely self-supervised, essentially. I mean, even if you sue a doctor for malpractice, you've got to get other doctors to testify against him. And too often, they're just going to say, oh, that was the standard of care. Okay, well, that's nice. But what if the standard of care is malpractice, like it seems to be in diabetes care, where they abandoned a successful treatment, the low-carb diet for diabetes, that was the standard of care 100 years ago, and they've not come up with anything better, right? But they all stand side by side and say, nope, this is what you should do. Yep, we have research showing it's harmful, but this is what you should do.
Didn't you mention that before that hospitals, they feed their patients seed oils a lot or something? What was the thing you were saying they did?
Oh, yeah. Well, hospitals all have to follow the dietary guidelines. And when the dietary guidelines were introduced, and this is all public information, you can go, read the accounts of the debates on Congress and the, what was his name? I can't remember the senator who promoted this, but he was a, progressive senator who ran for president at one point, I think in 1968. And, they're all saying this is not good scientific information. We can't do this. We don't have the evidence for this. And his famous comment was, I'm not a scientist, I'm a senator, and I don't have the time to wait for the evidence to be correct, and impose the dietary guidelines on the United States. And did the doctors protest? No, they all fell in line, even though they had just finished saying that you can't do this. We don't have the evidence to know that this is going to work out.
So you were saying something about they gave soybean oil or something to hospital patients, or what was it? You said it was hurting people and they had to stop, or maybe I got the facts wrong.
No. That's something called Intralipid, which is a soybean infusion that they use for people who, for whatever reason, can't eat. And that's been shown through a couple different lines of evidence to be very harmful for people. And Kathleen Gura, a pharmacist up at the Boston Children's Hospital, which is a part of Harvard Medical School, has demonstrated that it's harmful, and that if you eliminate the linoleic acid component from this infusion, that it becomes healthful, and got the FDA to approve this, right? So this isn't just me saying this. This is the FDA, which had their highest level of warning on this soybean oil product, this seed oil product. She convinced them to remove it for this alternative fish oil product. And I mean, that was decades of practice. And, it's kind of a mystery where this came from. And yeah, there's an argument that they didn't have any better idea, but how did they even get started on that in the first place? Thinking that soybean oil, which wasn't even a part of the human diet before the 20th century, was the best thing to inject children with. And then when children were dying from it, kept at it for decades. It's infuriating. It's absolutely infuriating.
We're speaking with Tucker Goodrich. We're going to take a quick break and return with more with your questions coming up next. I can see your questions coming in, and we'll try to get to them in quick fashion in just a second.
A lawsuit is not something that anyone looks forward to. It's a stressful process. There are attorneys in Tampa Bay that keep clients well informed, creating less stress. That law firm is Catania. Personal injury law is defended with full disclosure. There is no guessing game. If it's an auto accident, medical malpractice, nursing home negligence, unsafe working conditions, or motorcycle accidents, the law firm of Catania will handle the process worry-free from start to finish. Many victims don't realize they have a claim for the loss until they talk to Catania. They only represent private individuals and treat every case as if it's going to trial. Putting families first is more than just a slogan. It's their way of practicing law. It's a commitment to you. Remember, they don't get paid if you don't get paid. So go to CataniaCatania.com. Over 28 years in practice. Catania, personal injury, auto, and motorcycle accident attorneys. Catania, putting families first.
Office Tampa.
Not attorney spokeswoman.
Are you ready to transform your career? Jess Smith was too. She was stuck on a job that was controlling her life, consuming her free time, and offering little opportunity for growing her pay. Then she found FinTech Mortgage Association, and she never looked back. FinTech Mortgage Association makes home lending simple, and they take care of home buyers like family. Using technology to make everyone's life easier, FinTech Mortgage Association equips each of their loan solutions architects with the tools they need to build a career with a schedule they control, a product they can take pride in, and an earning potential that is life-changing. Unleash your true potential. Join FinTech Mortgage Association. Visit finmay.com. That's FINMAE.com. You're in charge now. NMLS ID 1492187. Equal housing lender.
Neighbor's Choice returns. I'm David Gronowski here with Tucker Goodrich, who is our friend who has been on the case of the vegetable oil paradigm shift that's going to take place in this country if we're successful in getting this information out there. We want to help people neighbor to neighbor. That's why we do this. Let's look at some of the comments and questions. Joseph asks, is Dr. Mercola writing a book about linoleic acid? I believe so. Another says
he is actually. He's writing it with a fellow named Chris Kenobi, who's an ophthalmologist who I know quite well, and I'm sure it'll be very interesting.
Chris is a friend of mine as well. We've had him on the show. A great guy, sounding the alarm about these problems. The cynic says the first guy on the podcast straight up said, "Just ignore the seed oil thing." LOL, referring to the podcast you were talking about of so-called experts getting it so wrong. Another ask, is soy sauce, is that a source of linoleic acid or something that we should avoid in that vein? What's your answer, Tucker?
No, soy sauce is a very old traditional Asian food. For me, I'm gluten intolerant, so most soy sauce contains wheat, but there is a type of soy sauce called tamari that doesn't have any wheat, and I consume that, and it doesn't have much in the way of estrogen, which is a problem with soy, or any meaningful amount of linoleic acid. So, enjoy.
What about the sodium content? Are you a big fan of avoiding high sodium foods like soy sauce, or
No, there's no good evidence for going on a low sodium diet. In fact, there's good evidence that a low sodium diet is harmful, and it's especially harmful in diabetics of any type. So that may be a topic for another show, but the evidence that salt isn't harmful in reasonable amounts goes back decades also, and is another one of these things that keeps getting pushed despite science not confirming it.
What about the idea that people who have hypertension or something should cut down on salt? Is there evidence for that?
Well, now, that's kind of interesting. My wife had, my father and my wife both were on high blood pressure medications. And when I put them on my kind of diet and told them not to worry about the salt, they both were able to come off their high blood pressure medications and achieve a low blood pressure in a couple of months. So, yeah, I think that's, there's good evidence that that's better related to seed oil consumption than to salt.
Another comment says, this is why education in the modern context is obfuscating in large part, particularly as it pertains to medicine. Another, Sean says, if you can, please ask Tucker if he knows of an effective strategy for burning off stubborn excess PUFA body fat. I already eliminated PUFAs from my diet and am exercising regularly. PUFAs are these vegetable oils for those who are new.
Low-level exercise, and do it in the morning, ideally before you have anything to eat. And that way you're forcing your body to burn fat and not burn off anything else that you may have eaten recently. That's what I do. And it's a little tough at first, but you'll get used to it. And, I much prefer working out on an empty stomach now, even if I'm going out for hours.
By low level, do you mean aerobic or anaerobic or both, or what? What would you say?
Aerobic.
Mm-hmm.
Aerobic. You want to do 80% aerobic, and then 80 to 90% low intensity aerobic and 10 to 20% high intensity.
And what do you think is a good amount of time to devote to that every day if you can?
As much as you can.
Yeah.
Try and go out and walk for half an hour. Pretty much everybody can do that. You'll be way better off. There doesn't seem to be any upper limit to the benefits of exercise.
Is there anything else that you can consume or something to jumpstart PUFA targeted body fat burning, or it doesn't work that way?
Not that I'm aware of. And I'm, super skeptical about anything that claims to be a superfood like that. Just don't eat, go out, go for a walk, work up a sweat ideally. If you can do a little more, go walk up a hill.
Well, very good. Tucker Goodrich, always a pleasure having you on. I want people to check out your blog, yelling-stop.blogspot.com. That's yelling-stop.blogspot.com, where you can read all of Tucker's comments on these different health topics. Thanks for coming on.
A pleasure as always, David. Thank you for having me on.
Very good. And so, folks, you know what to do. You've got to take care of yourself. As Tucker said, we can't rely on some kind of cult of experts. They're just not going to get it done. That doesn't mean they're all wrong. It doesn't mean that. It just means we have to use discernment. We can't have this kind of mimetic sacredness that we put around the TV bestowed experts or Harvard experts. Just because they're in a prestigious place, we imply, therefore they must be smarter or wiser. No, that's not the case. It's just not the case. And at some point, we've got to wake up to this. When experts are prestigious and yet they spend $2 trillion and tell you we had no idea Afghanistan would fall apart as soon as we left our third wave feminism projects we were doing there, at some point you got to say, maybe this expert worship stuff isn't working in any of the different fields that government presents to us. So that's it for today's show. I'm David Gronowski. Email me hello@aneighborschoice.com. Godspeed.
Your home for news, talk, and information. 1040 WHBO Pinellas Park, Tampa Bay's own News Talk 1040.
It's the only way I get news.